Hi, HR Nation. Welcome back to another episode of the HR Leaders Podcast, the show where we explore the future of work with industry experts and HR executives in the world's leading global brands. Today, we have a special guest on the show. We're joined by Kevin Reynolds, who is a former HR executive, leadership coach, organizational effectiveness consultant, and author of The Practical Leader. Welcome to the show. How are you, Kevin?
I'm very genki, Chris. I don't know if you know that word, but it's a Japanese
I don't. That's a new one.
Oh, everyone uses it. Virtually every foreigner here uses genki.
What does that mean?
All the time. It means, it loosely translated, it means I'm very well, I'm full of energy, I'm fine, thank you. But you can use it, if someone falls over, you can say, Genki desu ka? Are you okay? They say, yeah, I'm Genki. Or you can use it, how are you this morning? Yeah, I'm very Genki, full of life, full of energy.
Nice. I'll adopt that one. So tell everyone where, just for context for everyone, where are you joining us from? Because that will explain a bit more.
Point that out. For those of you that know Japan, I'm in Tokyo. Actually, I'm in West Tokyo in a place called Hachioji, and have been here in Japan itself for about 30 years, and in Hachioji for about 4 or 5 years now.
Wow. So how does someone born in close to south of London end up living in Tokyo for 30 years?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So 30 years ago, when I wasn't doing very well as a sales guy and things were kind of falling apart, I sat down one day and said, I think I'll go to Japan. And I actually remember sitting down, literally just having almost somewhere between an inspiration and a desperation. And I thought, right, I'm going to put on my rucksack and go to Japan. Actually, my plan was to take a year off and kind of travel around the world with the rucksack on, starting in Japan. And the reason to go to Japan was because you could be an English teacher, and you could earn you could stay for 6 months or however long you wanted to stay, and you could earn some money. You didn't need to do anything special. You could just teach English. But I also came to Japan at the same time to study Ninpo, which is Ninjutsu, the ninja thing.
Really?
People around.
Wow.
Yeah, so
that's so cool.
I stopped far too early, injured my knees and probably injured my brain as well. But my intention was to stay in Japan maybe 6 months and then go somewhere else. But life is what happens when you're making other plans. So I met my wife there. Hello, I said, fancy seeing you here. No, I met my wife, got married, we had kids, and then suddenly I'd been here about 8 years. We went back to live in England for a couple of years, and then we came back here, and so the total time is 30 something years. So my kids are now grown up. My son is over there doing a YouTube broadcast video thing, I think. And my daughter lives in Canada. And we stayed.
Amazing. What is it? How would you describe it to everyone from a cultural perspective?
Japan, well, not as different as people are, not as different as I thought it would be. I arrived, when I got here, I thought it would all be geisha girls and Kyoto-like temples everywhere. But so this is 1989, September 1989. So I was kind of surprised to see that Tokyo is a city. A city like it's a city. It's not like a collection of little old temples everywhere, like I sort of had imagined it to be. But it's a very safe and clean and what's the word? I don't want to say controlled, because that's not the right word.
Organized.
Organized is much better. It's a much better word. The trains run on time, and if they're 10 seconds late or 20 seconds late, people apologize. There was a famous thing, I think last year, went around the world where the train arrived 30 seconds early and they apologized for that.
No way.
By the way, that doesn't happen all the time. You don't get apologies all the time if the train is late, but you get certain instances where whereas in the UK, we accept that it's always late.
Yeah. Anyone in London waiting for a train is always delayed. So no one's,
Or it's just the next train coming early. So, but what I like about Japan most, it's hard to describe. I often struggle to get the language right on this, but at the base culture, the fundamental base culture is actually quite a high level. I'm not quite sure how to put it. I feel like I'm degrading the UK if I say something like this, but there's not much of a hooligan culture like there has been in my experience.
So you grew up near South London, and I live in East London, so I get what you mean.
There isn't so much of that. but there's and Japan. Oh, the other thing about Japan as well. I mean, I could talk all night about it, but the other thing I learned relatively early on was that Japan had a reputation for copying things and not innovating and just copying whatever the West had done, and then
I think the West just made that up to make them feel better.
Yeah, but actually, that's exactly what it was. Actually, when I arrived, I realized Japan is highly creative. And I mean, we know that now through manga and all these other things that are going on, and baby metal groups and all these things that we now see. But even 30 years ago, I realized it wasn't like that. Japan is a hugely creative place, although perhaps some of the creativity was stifled in the job for life system that companies had put together. But the culture itself was, and the individuals were very creative, even if the companies had kind of squashed that creativity a little bit.
Yeah,
maybe even quite.
So tell me how you go traveling to Japan, you're studying in ninjutsu whilst teaching English. How do you then become a HR director?
Yeah, actually, that's good. Accidentally.
Yeah.
Accidentally, maybe. Well, so I was an English teacher, and we had kids, and when you're an English teacher and you have kids and you want to send them to an international school because they're expensive here, I had to get what I call a proper job. So actually, I was an English teacher, but I was teaching business English. So I was teaching presentation skills and negotiation skills and things like that. So, but as I said, I needed a proper job because we wanted to send the kids to an international school. So I actually just sent my CV to a few places, and I sent it to Intel. And Richard, if you're listening, Richard Devereux, if you're listening, at that moment, Intel Japan, Richard was my boss, Irish guy, who was based in Japan, and they were looking for a training manager. And I had, I'm a trainer written on my CV. And so, that Richard kindly hired me. And I stayed there and was training manager for a couple of years. Then I was HR business partner. So I sort of stumbled into it, actually, because I needed a proper job to pay for the school fees, which are hugely expensive.
It's so interesting because as I've done 400 plus episodes, and there's 10 people I can name that actually planned on working in HR. Everyone else just somehow found their way into the role, and it just stuck.
Yeah, you sort of fall into it, I think. I think perhaps some of the best people as well in my HR experience came out of the business
into HR, from other functions.
They didn't think to themselves, I'll work in HR one day, but they eventually did. Stumbled in, fell in, excuse me, dropped my microphone here. What's
it like working? What from HR over in Japan versus UK? Is it further ahead, further behind, just completely different in terms of
yes, and yes, all of them.
All of them.
So, if you're working in a company, let's take Intel as an example. So if you're working with Intel has where I used to work, has a worldwide HR system. Same as Maersk Line, where I also used to work. So the worldwide way of doing things was implemented everywhere.
So culturally different, right? The actual place itself is completely.
Well, the place is culturally different, but you could still implement, maybe not 100% successfully, but you could still implement the HR methods and practices. I think where Japan culturally as HR, business culturally as HR, tended to be that HR was very administrative, very transactional heavy, very administrative heavy. And in some of the more famous Japanese companies, HR had a lot of power, and they can send you somewhere. They used to be able to say, basically on Friday, next Monday, we're going to send you, from Tokyo to Kyoto, and you're going to work in Kyoto, or even further afield, and you're going to be working there for a year. And individual people had very little say. In fact, probably in some companies, they still do have very little say against these almost arbitrary decisions, not quite, almost arbitrary decisions about sending people. It's called tanshin funin in Japanese. You go over there and you kind of leave your family behind. And HR had a lot of power inside companies, but it was really transactional and administrative. But there's a growing trend now in Japan to move to much more towards this, just, I can't say strategic, it always comes out wrong, but to move far more to this strategic style of HR, linking the HR policies and procedures and strategies to the business strategy. So I think that generation of HR BPs are now growing up. In fact, one of the reasons one of the partners in our original HRBP program was actually someone who at that time, Lida, if you're listening, who was working for GE, and she's a Japanese lady, but she wanted to up-level the HRBP strategic mindset in Japan at the same time. So for a little while, GE Healthcare were kind of sponsors, not, money sponsors, but just kind of put their name on it for the HR program, because there's this need to change from this administration mindset into this more different way of thinking, strategic mindset.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So it seems like there's a fair bit of work to do then, because over in Europe and North America, two communities I operate in, we're that's the way we work anyway. So it's kind of expected, right? It's almost.
Well, there is.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm saying, one of the good friends of mine is Dave Auric, and who obviously talk about the HR business partner model. Now, when we talk about that, it seems so outdated.
Yes.
Yet in companies like Japan, it's something clearly that they still have a long way to go. Whereas
it's kind of new stuff here.
Yeah, interesting. And that's a lot of what do you do now, right? Helping organizations exactly in this particular area.
We're trying to, yeah. Although I think because of COVID, we're kind of, as I said, things slow down. We're trying to reinvent our approach to that. And there's quite a few Japanese consultancies springing up around.
I bet it's a great time. Yeah, it's a very good. Yeah, it's a great time to do that.
But my message has always been, yes, of course they can do it. It's not like, oh my God, the Japanese can only do transactional stuff. It's not like that at all. It's yes, of course they can do the strategic stuff. We just have to show them a good way of doing it. And help them understand.
Was that frustrating for you, or because I suppose your first HR role, was that just that's all you knew at the time, or did you kind of get a peek into other organizations going, wow, we're focusing way too much time and energy on policy, on administration, where we should be focusing on our people, our culture, etc., the business?
Yeah, well, actually, let me just rephrase what I said. Japanese HR focused on the people, but they did it from a kind of controlling viewpoint, administration viewpoint, rather than perhaps a capability viewpoint. So let me just make that quick point. Mm-hmm. But even when I first joined at Maersk, so this is, I don't know how long ago this was, 15 something years ago, Maersk itself was moving from a transactional to a facilitative HR model. So they were evaluating around the world. Maersk itself felt it was too transactional, and therefore needed to head in this strategic direction. So it's not as if Japan is unique like that. And other companies I've worked with, I try not to mention too many names, even though they kind of talk strategy, HR, a lot of what they do is actually policies and procedures and stuff like that. And that's not necessarily Japanese companies, it's foreign companies as well. So, I'm not going to say it's lip service. I don't mean it like that. But I remember many, many years ago, oh, crikey, I'm getting old, having an organizational capability workshop with a company whose name we've already mentioned several times, where I used to work once in China somewhere. We all went there, we all came back. But when we came back, the organizational capability stuff that we learned didn't get implemented. That sounds like a criticism. It's not meant to be. It's more like a comment. It's easy to kind of talk about these things and get excited about them, but it's hard to come back in the office and actually kind of do them.
Yeah, I get it. I think we've all been there. I think I've definitely been on a number of those training days, and we've come back and then it's like business as usual. Like nothing even happened. As well as like, wait a minute, we just spent 3 days out of the office going through this, and we've come back and everyone's just gone straight back into the notes from the 2 days gone in the top drawer. That's it. It's done.
That does happen. We've all been there. We're all guilty of that. But anyway, from a viewpoint of Japan, I'm glad to see that from an HR viewpoint, anyway, Japan is changing the way it does HR. And a lot of it is being driven by new CEOs coming in the company. or growing up with inside the company and taking over as CEO. And an example of that actually is Fujitsu. They've got a brand new CEO from a couple of years ago now, who's really changing the company, really changing their approach to everything. And you can see that, although I'm not closely connected to them, so I don't know their HR people very well, but you can see in the casual connection I have, you can see the changes that are going to happen inside that particular company. And it's really been driven by the CEO and his desire to really make that a really modern company. Because it was kind of a little bit too traditional in the past.
Yeah. Both personally and professionally, what advice would you give to other colleagues of yours that are perhaps considering a move to lead HR out in Asia, or just go move over, having been there for 30 years now? I'm sure there's a lot you've learned along the way. What advice would you give someone who's considering a career move?
Yeah, please come here. And there's quite a lot of foreign HR folk here in Japan, from Europe and America. And I think from my viewpoint, they're particularly welcome. They bring with them something different. I think their biggest challenge is probably not in changing HR or changing the Japanese or any other nationality that's within the HR team. That's probably not their challenge. I think their challenge is changing the mindset of the business leaders. To accept certain things. So, for example, I really must not mention the name of this company. I might do accidentally, but there's a guy, I mustn't mention his name either, but he's in Japan, and he's now running the HR organization kind of worldwide from a Japanese company based in Japan. And one of his biggest challenges is not really changing HR. His biggest challenge is dealing with the business leaders who still see HR as this kind of old thing. Old way of doing things, and he's a English guy. He may even be Scottish, actually, and he's really trying to drive this change. So from my viewpoint, please come and expect the challenge to be with the business as opposed to with kind of HR itself.
Do you think over in Europe, we've seen the last 18 months or so has propelled HR forward? And now HR in many organizations is seen as the same value or in consideration as the CEO CFO relationship. In many companies now, a CEO, HR executive, then CFO, because we've already understood throughout the last 18 months, right? It's about our people, and HR has been at the center of that. Have you seen that same type of reaction where you are as well? Do you think that's helped propel HR forward into the forefront and the value that it adds to the business?
Yeah, actually, that's a great question. I don't quite know the answer, Chris. Actually, I couldn't say that I've seen it, but I would expect it's happening. Actually, I would say, for example, well, I mentioned Fujitsu before. I would say it's happening within Fujitsu, probably more slowly than I can see from the outside looking in.
Of course,
I sense there's something happening there. And as a few people, by the way, you mentioned that I wrote a book called The Practical HR Leader. Actually, The Practical Leader. I wrote another book called The Practical HR Business Partner. So a few folk in Japan have bought that book and sent me private messages saying, this is great, and this is what we are implementing in our company now. So it's good to see we're on the right path. And that makes me think, there are changes happening I can't quite see yet.
Yeah.
They're not quite there yet, but there are things going on within companies.
So tell us more about the new book then. What was the inspiration behind the new book? Obviously, The Practical Leader, a guide to creating highly engaged and high-performing organizations that achieve extraordinary.
Yeah, well, there's two books. There's The Practical Leader and The Practical HR Business Partner. And they're actually two sides of the same coin. Okay. They're basically one book written for HR and the same kind of book written for leadership. So there's a lot of similar content. So you don't need to read both books, basically.
It was the idea behind that, to your point earlier about engaging the business. So you're talking about the challenge is not about HR, challenge is about convincing the stakeholders in the business. Is that why you both wrote these two books?
Yeah, well, I basically, yeah. I think I wrote the HR Business Partner book because I think there's I wrote it for junior HR people rather than the senior HR people who are starting out on their sort of strategic HRBP journey. And I wrote it for them because I think the biggest challenge they have is A, presenting HR to the business, and B, interfacing with the business and combining those so that when they talk to the business, they present their solutions as if they're business solutions, not as if they're another HR policy which the business has to implement. So what I try to get the readers, which is the same in the workshop actually, basically it's just the workshop in the book. What I try to get them to do is start by looking at the business strategy. Start by realizing that their solutions must link to the business issues or the business problems or the goals of the company or the strategy and so on, and start from there so that when they do come up with, even if it's just the same old HR solutions, talent management this or remuneration that, even if it's the same old solution, they link those to the needs of the business. So we saw this, a couple of points in this. We saw this when we did the role plays in the HRBP class. We brought in a local business leader to sit down and listen to the presentations. And the ones that he found most convincing were the ones that clearly stated, this is your business problem, Mr. Phil, and this is our HR solution, and this is why it'll help you fix your business problem. Yeah, he kind of liked those solutions best. So that's sort of why I wrote it. Actually, I wrote it because it's the training class in a book format. I can't put everything in the training class itself.
And there's only so many people you can get in a room as well, right? So this transcends the classroom.
Sorry, Krista, as I said, I have a habit of talking.
Oh, keep going, it's fine.
The other thing we found, and I put it in the book as well, but the other thing we found in the workshops, again, I'm talking about Japan here. One of the first questions I ask, because the people come from various different companies and they sit down and gather at the tables. So one of the first questions I ask them is, okay, what's your company strategy? And then a few brave souls might say something. Most of them don't say anything not because they're shy, but because they don't know. And then the second question I ask is, well, how many of you have read your company report? And I think out of 60 people, I think no one ever put their hand up to say they'd actually read their company report. So, that's quite a useful thing, because then we can actually teach them that they should be reading their company report, and therefore they should be aligning their HR solutions to, the needs of the business. But on the other hand,
is it because they didn't want to, or they just was never involved in that conversation? They're never invited to that meeting, if that makes sense, or it just didn't even cross their mind?
I think that one. I think they didn't even cross their mind one. I've got a story about that. Is it okay? Can I just waffle on with my stories? Oh. So years ago, when I was training manager, I was at Intel. Oh God, I mentioned the name of the company. Never mind.
So anyone can Google that you're Intel. It's fine. It's fine.
But one day I was asked to do an internal presentation class for the sales team, who were the Fujitsu sales team. So they would sell to Fujitsu. They got Fujitsu come into the conversation again. So I thought, oh my God, I've got to teach them how to sell to Fujitsu. What am I going to do? So I read the Fujitsu company report, because I didn't, at that time, I knew nothing about Fujitsu. But when I met the sales team to do the presentation class, I asked them, the first question I asked them was, okay, so by the way, let's make sure we link our presentations to the Fujitsu company strategy and so on. So what's the Fujitsu company strategy? None of them had read the Fujitsu company report. I mean, this is their customer. At that time, it was one of the biggest customers in the world. And that was the moment I learned, we need to read the company report. We need to understand our customers. And if we're an HR person, we need to understand our own company's report. I mean, of course, there are presentations from your business leaders, and there's all sorts of things on the internet.
But other stuff's public information.
But there are lots. Yeah, there are lots.
I mean, the report for most companies, that's public. You can read that.
Yeah, exactly. So it's not a big slog to read it. Actually, some of them are. Some of them are.
I've looked at when I was in sales. I would do that too sometimes with particular clients. And some of them, is a tough read. But some of them, most good ones have like a high level overview that you can read as well. So
I always suggested to read the CEO's letter or whatever it's called, because that if you only read one thing, read that.
At least you're talking the same language, right? If anyone questions you, like, well, I'm talking the same language as the CEO.
Exactly. And the CEO said this, so therefore,
So, exactly.
So that's kind of why I wrote the book. But I also wrote the book because not only because I think people should link, HR to the business need and think and speak like a business person, even if you're an HR person, but also because in my limited experience, not that great, there are lots of things that we did in HR that worked and lots of things that didn't work and lots of things we should have done that we didn't do. And so I sort of collected all of those things that worked and brought in other things that I thought, 20 years ago, I wish I had known this, or I wish I had done this, wish I'd known how to do a key person, key position analysis. I didn't even know there was such a thing.
And that's the thing as well, Kevin, for everyone listening to know, the books are very practical, right? There's many examples of how to do it as opposed to the high level overviews.
Yeah, there are. And they're also, we wrote them really, although they're in English, we wrote them really for the Japanese market. So there are little example presentations in there. There are sections, when you're talking to your internal customer, how do you say things? So although they're written for Japanese, I think they're really useful for anyone who has to make a presentation to anyone anyway, actually in any language. So thank you for saying they're practical, Chris, because that's what they're supposed to be.
I only say that because I speak to so many authors. Every other day there's a leadership book that comes out, right? As well. And a lot of the ones that come across are very high level overviews, but with no actionable steps or examples. And that's what people are really looking for. That's what helps the most. By the way, I really appreciate you for saying that. But that's what we're trying to do. We're just trying to give, for the HR book, especially the more junior HR PPs, something they can do tomorrow. And they can kind of change it into the way that they would use it. Practical things. Thanks for joining me. It's been really, I'm like fast. I feel like I could talk to you forever about those of things. But so what's next for you? Obviously, you're like many of us, including myself, the pandemic kind of put a full stop on some of the things we're doing. But what's next for you? Where can people check out the work you're doing and buy a copy of the books and connect and stuff like that?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn, and the links to the books are, of course, on LinkedIn. I'm also on Amazon, and I write business books as K.A. Reynolds, and I write novels as Kevin A. Reynolds. But if you're still not sure, just send me a note on LinkedIn.
And it's kevinreynolds.com, right? The website.
Yeah, the website is Kevin A. Reynolds, all one word, kevinarreynolds.com.
Okay, Kevin A. Reynolds.
But that's my novel website.
Oh, is that what I found? Because I came across the website and I was like, am I in the right place? Because I saw the novels as well. It kind of threw me off for a second. I was like, oh, this is the same person.
Yeah, it probably is.
As well.
I'd say at a pinch, it probably is me. No, so next for me is, do we have a couple more minutes? Or
yeah, of course.
Yeah, next for me, yesterday I was coaching a guy in leadership, and as we were talking, he said he kind of needed a checklist to refer back to everything that we talked about in coaching and so on. And I thought, you know what? My leadership book doesn't have this kind of personal checklist. It's got lots of stuff in it, but it doesn't have that kind of checklist. So the next thing on the leadership book is to put this sort of, am I doing okay as a leader? What should I be doing? Checklist into the book. So that's a new chapter that will come. And then I'm halfway through my next novel, which is just a follow-up to this one called The Girl Who Fell Through Time. And then I have another couple of stories in my head. I've got to get them.
Staying busy then.
Yeah, staying busy, but I'm not exactly Alistair MacLean or Jack Grisham or whoever else or J.K. Rowling. not selling enough books to retire just yet.
No worries. Well, thanks for coming on, and for everyone listening, make sure you click the links below. All of the links that Kevin just mentioned are already in the description, so make sure you check him out. and connected on LinkedIn. But apart from that, I appreciate you coming on the show. It's been a fascinating, a real pleasure, and I look forward to chatting again soon.
Chris, thanks a lot. And I wish you and everyone listening, wish you all the best. And I think
Thanks.
your office looks better than mine. I'm going to change mine too.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Like that one very much. All the best now. Bye now.